Welcome to Whimsy Woven Stories, where imagination takes flight and every tale is a journey into wonder. Here, we breathe life into the pages of timeless stories and create new adventures that spark joy and curiosity. Whether you're a lover of classic fairy tales, fantastical adventures, or heartwarming fables, you'll find a story to capture your heart and stir your imagination. Join us as we weave a tapestry of whimsy and wonder, one story at a time.
Not a student of mine. Someone on campus? Maybe. But I didn't think so. Much older than my kids to be their friend. Too young to be one of Sue's coworkers. And it all felt wrong. She was from somewhere in the past, from another world. I'm sorry, sir, but the lid came off the box and a wave of memories came over me. It was your name on all the letters you wrote to my mother. My heart was racing. Julia. You. Julia and Trevor. I swallowed. You're their daughter. Yes, sir. Louise White. She held out her hand, and I shook it. I mumbled absent-mindedly in honor of her grandmother. Her face brightened, a wide smile appearing on it. Julia's smile. Julia's deep, dark eyes. She was tall like her father, only a little shorter than me, but not lanky like him. She had inherited her mother's curves. Her skin was the lovely color of coffee and milk, something between Trevor and Julia. That's right. I nodded, trying to buy time. I knew it was the name she had planned, but then the question surfaced, too quickly for her to answer. Wait, why? I haven't talked to them in years. Why are you here? How did you find me? Why did you take the letters? Louise's mouth opened and closed a couple times, probably trying to decide which question to answer first. I wanted to ask you some questions, sir. David. Malcolm was my middle name, which I haven't used in over 20 years. David. The letters are the reason I'm here, the reason I needed to find you. I don't know how you fit into my parents' past. I don't really know much about their past, but I didn't realize it until recently. And I wanted to find out more about them and about the man who wrote those letters to my mother. As for how, it took some time. And finally finding you was as much luck as anything else. She shook her head. I'm not some crazy, I'm not stalking you. But when I found this in my mom's stuff, I have so many questions and I need answers. Why don't you just ask her? Her face stretched out. I can't. You can't or you don't want to. She sighed. I can't. My parents, Louise looked into the distance. There was a fire. And I was surprised by a pain I never thought I'd feel again. I'd lost them for the second time. I never thought it would hurt so much. Never thought I could feel their loss the way I had before. The feeling was muted, but it was there. It probably saddened me more than the realization that they were gone. Oh dear. I'm sorry, Louise. She gave me a slight, grateful smile. Thank you. It's been a couple years now, but she shook her head. Anyway, I can't ask them. I can't ask anyone. All my grandparents are dead. My mom and dad don't have any siblings, and she shrugged. I think you're the only person who can tell me what they didn't tell me. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, answer all her questions. Part of me wanted the past to stay buried. Yes, they had a good reason for keeping things from her, and I thought maybe I owed them, but then another, darker, almost forgotten part of me growled that I didn't owe them shit. But even if I don't owe them, what do I owe myself? But then that hopeful look, so similar to Julia's, decided for me. Why don't you come inside? She was sitting at my kitchen table. Do you want something to drink? Water? Soda? Beer? Water, please. If it weren't for the late evening, I would have preferred a beer, but supplied us with water. We sat and drank for a few moments until the silence turned from uncomfortable to stifling. Are you really sure you want to know? Or is it just idle curiosity? At this point, I need to know. Look, I know it's weird, and I know it's a lot to take in all at once. I'm sorry I just showed up at your house, but I couldn't find your home number anywhere, and I thought it was. Well, it's the kind of thing you should do in person, not at work. She took a sip. Before mom and dad died, they told me about how they met, about the life they had before we moved to Miami, all of it. and I know, or at least I think I do. After the fire, I spent 2 years trying to figure it all out, but I never had any luck, and now I realize that at least some of what they told me was a lie. Those letters were the first clue, and they made some old memories come together. Some pictures of the three of you in boxes I found in storage. The fact that my dad and grandpa had a fight, and no one wanted to talk to me about why. The way my grandma ducked whenever I asked about how mom and dad spent their time before Miami. Eventually I gave up. It was just dead end after dead end, and I needed to stop dwelling on it. I was in my last year of college when the fire happened, and I took a year off to deal with everything. That led to me clearing out my mom's storage unit, which led to, she pointed to a shoebox. And then I went down the rabbit hole for the rest of that year, trying to figure things out, but no one could give me any answers. So I went back to college, got my bachelor's degree, and applied to a master's program. I nodded slowly. Then how did you find me? Louise laughed a self-deprecating laugh. Pure dumb luck. I wanted to find out more about the university that accepted me for my master's degree. I went to the website, looked at the various departmental pages, and I found my picture. She pointed. Bingo. I don't mean to be flippant, but you've really aged a lot. I recognized you almost immediately. I mean, the fact that your middle name was there helped too. The lovely young woman smiled sadly and lowered her eyes. Before I found your picture on the college website, I honestly thought you could be my father. It would at least make sense. I mean, the secrecy. These letters are well, they do represent something special. I cringed a little. Did you read them? I looked at parts of them, but yeah, you clearly quite obviously loved mom. From the way she was with you in the pictures I found, it was mutual. And the dates, they contradict what my parents told me about their past. A deep inhale and exhale gave me some time to collect my thoughts. Why don't you tell me what you know, or at least what you believe, and then we'll start there. I don't need details, but for one, I didn't know Trevor and Julia moved to Miami. So why not do a brief overview of the past as you understand it? I suppose. She bit her lip. Let's take a look. They told me they met in high school in a small town in Texas. They'd both moved there with their parents. My grandmother was going to teach high school Spanish, and my grandfather had some kind of office job. It was never entirely clear to me. They became friends and then more, eventually moving to Austin to attend UCLA together. Then they unexpectedly had me, got married, and moved to Miami where the rest of her family was. Mom wanted me to grow up around her cousins and siblings. Eventually, Grandma came back. I was their only child, but they seemed like a happy couple. They were good parents. Mom was a teacher, Dad was a computer programmer. There didn't seem to be any dark secrets or anything. She shrugged her shoulders. Then I went to school, and I was doing well, and there was a fire, and I found out about it. Well, that at least my mom was in love with someone else for most of the time she and my dad were supposedly together. If I counted correctly, you started sending her those letters when you were in your senior year of high school, and they didn't stop until almost the end of her sophomore year in college. You were engaged, and then the letters would end. Louise scratched the back of her head. It wouldn't be so strange, but there are pictures of the three of you after the time you spent together. I thought maybe Mom tore everything up and you left, but it didn't match the pictures. You, Mom, and Dad all looked like hardened friends in them throughout your senior year at UCLA. So it had to be something else, but I can't figure out what it was. She had most of the information, but still not enough to put it all together. Louise clearly loved her parents. Maybe it would have been better for her if she hadn't found out anything, but I could tell she was going to keep digging. I glanced at the clock on the wall, then nodded to myself. Okay, I can tell you more about this later, but I have to pick up my kids from school. Why don't you come have dinner with us? Her college life was definitely not a string of party days, judging by the look on her face as she tried to balance decorum, the desire not to annoy the person who had the information she needed, and the desire for something to eat other than ramen and frozen burritos. I don't want to impose. I'm inviting. It's not an imposition. Laugh at me, we could use the extra company, and maybe the kids will enjoy the idea that their old man actually has a past. Would the wife mind? She realized almost immediately that she had stepped on a landmine, but the mine was old enough that there was no explosion. Sue Day. I'm afraid she's no longer with us. She was an EMT. The PPE protocols weren't very good at the beginning of the pandemic, and well, She suffered from asthma. They didn't know then how dangerous it could be. I smiled encouragingly at her. It's all right. You didn't know. Still, I'm sorry. Thank you. Anyway, I invite you to have dinner with us and then we can talk some more. Unless you have somewhere you need to be? Louise agreed and we climbed into my car. My kids had noticeably different reactions to her. Dana, my 12-year-old daughter, was mostly uninterested. She was in that teenage stage where she was starting to find herself, or at least trying to, and cold indifference was her default mode. Louis, on the other hand, was 14 and hormonal, and Louise was a gorgeous young woman. He caught every word she said. As we sat in the restaurant and ate, talking about nothing in particular, I was struck by how wonderful Louise was. I don't mean her beauty. She was a very intelligent, well-read woman. Her degree was in biochemistry, but she also loved literature, my field. She was kind. My son really liked her, and instead of ignoring him or teasing him, Louise instead talked to him like he was almost his age, not in a way that made him think he had any sort of chance with her, but still enough to make him feel good about himself, confident rather than embarrassed. As expected, the kids really enjoyed the idea that Daddy had a past. I never talked to them about it, probably for the same reasons Louise's parents didn't discuss their past with her. At dinner, I mentioned my friendship with her parents, but nothing more than that. After we finished and got home, I sent the kids off to do their homework and get ready for bed. Louise and I sat down together on the couch to talk privately. They are wonderful kids. Thank you. I'm very proud of them. They have ... well. The last few years have been hard, but they've really come into their own. Better than I have, I guess. She smiled sympathetically. Louise, there's something I want to ask you. Yes? If there was a secret about my wife that would change the way they felt about her, do you think I should tell them? Maybe not now, but when they go to college? I could tell by the look on Louise's face that she knew immediately what I was talking about, but she played along. I guess it would depend. If it's something that would be good, then yes, definitely. Neutral? Maybe, but bad. She sighed. I guess it would really depend on how bad it was. But their situation is different from mine. If this hypothetical secret did exist, they don't have a hint of it yet. I do. I only have half the story, and I can't believe that what I've imagined is worse than the truth. I took a deep breath. Now what I'm going to say is this: what I can tell you will change the way you feel about both of your parents. If I had only met you and known you were their daughter, if you didn't have that shoebox full of letters, I would have never, ever told you about it. It would mean a big shift in the way you look at them. Rest assured. Louise looked puzzled. I think she imagined something serious, but not at all what I implied. Before she could speak, I continued quietly. You love your parents, I can tell. I'm sure you had your differences with them, as all children do. But I want you to remember this: I can't believe they would ever tell you this on their own. If you really need to know, I will tell you. But you have to decide if it's a real need, or just a curiosity you've let go too far. Because hearing me tell you won't make the problem go away, Louise. She nodded solemnly. Good. I hear you. I'll think about it, really think about it. How do I get in touch with you once I've made my decision? We exchanged cell phone numbers before she left. I didn't have to wait long for her call. A few days later, we were sitting in a cafe near the campus. A quiet voice in the back of my head mumbled something. She was a student, and I was a professor, and one could draw certain wrong conclusions if one was inclined to do so. But she was not my student. I had never taught her. I could have no direct influence on her academic career. No ethical rules had been broken, even if we had been more than just a couple of acquaintances coming to talk. Thank you for coming, David. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and the truth is, I'm worried about what I might find out, but I really need to know. It's going to gnaw at me until I find out. I nodded. Good. Then let's start at the beginning. Your parents told you some half-truths and outright lies. Yeah, your mom and dad met sophomore year of high school when they moved to a small town in Texas. What they overlooked was that I moved there the same year. What brought the three of us together was the fact that we were all outsiders. Trev was from New York, Julia was from Miami, and I was from Los Angeles. My mom had moved in with relatives. My dad had left us and she needed a place to stay, so we ended up in this little backwater town. It wasn't much to base a friendship on, but it worked. Trevor was the best friend I had at that point towards the end of our sophomore year. I knew he was interested in Julia, but so was I. And Trev, well, he was soft-hearted and humble, while I was the complete opposite. I grinned. I was a real rebel without a clue back then, and your mom was into it. She and I started dating during my junior year. Trev took it gracefully and started dating all over the place. We all made a pact that we would get out of this little hole together, and we did, going to the University of California at Austin, like your parents told you to. The letters were, I wrote them to your mom because one of the few common interests we had was writing. When we were in high school, we exchanged letters back and forth. In college at the time, there was a rule that you had to live either at home or in a dorm for the first 2 years. The reason I kept writing letters to her was so that we would have something for each other while we couldn't be together. After her sophomore year, no more letters because that's when we moved in together. We were engaged, like you said, and we got married this summer between semesters. Louise's eyes widened. What? I nodded solemnly. We were married for 3 years. Of course, your father was our friend, but he was kind of distant during that period. Not really, I mean, he was my best friend and probably Julia's too. He was best man at our wedding. But we were newlyweds, and he was still trying to find someone, and I know he felt like something of a third wheel. When we graduated from college, we had decisions to make. Julia's dream was to become a teacher. I wanted to get a master's degree and then get a doctorate, but that didn't seem to be working out. I promised myself that I wasn't going to be like my father, some slacker who didn't take care of his family. So I got my bachelor's degree in English and went to work on advertising. I didn't like the job, but it paid well enough. I wrote some good material, and my bosses asked me to travel as part of a team that brought in new clients. That meant more money, and that was great. Julia and I wanted kids, and we decided that since she finally had a stable teaching job and I was making more money, she could go off the pill. And she did. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. When you said you thought you could have been my child, well, truth be told, you should have been. She covered her mouth with her hand. Mom and Dad, were they? I was out of town on business. I don't think. They told me, and I believed them, that it happened once and only once. He came to visit, I wasn't there, and they decided to hang out together, just the two of them, which they hadn't done in a while. Trevor had broken up with his girlfriend. Julia's hormones were out of control from the pill withdrawal. They'd gotten drunk and high and... I shrugged. Tears started to form in Louise's eyes. I sympathized with her and knew it was only going to get worse from here. Do you want to take a break? She shook her head furiously no. I took a sip of coffee. I hadn't told this story in years. I expected it to be more painful for me, as it had been before, but more than anything it hurt for Louise. They hadn't planned on telling me. It was a mistake, they regretted it, and mutually decided that knowing could only hurt me. Julia was. She was trying to make amends when I got home. That's all I'm gonna say. Trevor was avoiding me, and when I did see him, I knew something was wrong. I'm not sure if they could have kept it up, but then they were forced to tell. Julia was pregnant. She waited to tell me until she and Trevor could talk, and they told me together. I didn't even realize she was pregnant until I found out about their betrayal. IA. My gaze fell to my hands resting on the table. I'll be honest, I went on a rampage. I attacked your father. But he didn't fight back, just kept his hands up and tried not to get too hurt. I stopped when he was on the ground, frustrated that he didn't give me the pleasure of a real fight. Julia just kept yelling at me to stop. I got out and got drunk like I'd never gotten drunk in my life for. Well, for a few days. There were tears streaming down Louise's face now. I could see her trying to formulate questions, but I just carried on. She would find out soon enough. I think Julia was hoping that by telling me this way, by not putting the blame on me at the end of the pregnancy, if it was Trevor's baby, I would forgive her. IA. Maybe I could if the baby. If you were my daughter. People make mistakes. I could accept that and try to deal with it. I grinned sadly. Or maybe I couldn't forgive I was so angry with her. After all, we had only been married for 3 years. But like I said, I wanted to be a good father, which my father wasn't, so I'd like to think I could forgive in that case. However, I told her that there was no way I could raise another man's child that was the result of infidelity, especially one that, well, it clearly wasn't mine. This was before you could test for paternity with a blood test during pregnancy, and none of us wanted to risk the baby's life with an intrauterine test. So the three of us were in limbo. Julie and I were married, but we slept in separate rooms. Trevor had all but disappeared from our lives, but we were waiting to see if he had to step in. And then you were born, and that was the end of it. My marriage fell apart. My best friend gave me horns, and I was in a job I didn't particularly like. I applied for a master's program in California, and, well, here I am. Louise squeezed out, "Oh my God, have a drink." She nodded and sipped her coffee, shivering and trying to regain control. I said softly, "This doesn't change anything about you, Louise. Your parents loved you. They lied to you because they loved you. You are their daughter, and towards you, your father did the right thing." She laughed a short, harsh barking laugh. "Yes," after he. She shook her head in disgust. "How do you? Why are you protecting them?" "I'm not protecting them. I'm protecting you." What they did was wrong. It was the biggest betrayal of my life, and until recently, the worst pain I've ever felt. I frowned. But Sue's death had completely overshadowed that pain. And even ignoring that, it had. I laughed and pointed at Louise. "That was a lifetime ago. It's been about 7 times longer since your mom and I divorced than our marriage lasted. What kind of misanthrope do I have to be to sustain my anger for that long? Don't get me wrong, I've been bitter for quite some time. Angry at the world, furious at your father. I hated him. He stole my wife, my life, and my chance at a child. But I came here and made a new life for myself. I followed my dream and became a professor. I met Sue, and she helped me through this pain. She gave me 2 wonderful children and an amazingly happy marriage." I shook my head. "What your parents did to me was horrible. But how did it end? I'm happy. If I'm being honest, I'm probably happier than I would have been if none of this had ever happened." Louise tilted her head to the side. "But you loved her so much. The letters. Dot were written by a child to a child. Yes, I loved her madly, desperately. It was a love like a forest fire. Everyone should have at least one such fire in their life. But forest fires burn out. For the lucky ones in life, they become something stable. Best in the long run. What we had with Sue. I smiled at the memory of my favorite wife. It was the type of fire that warmed the house around which we built a life. Maybe the fire I had with your mom would have developed into something similar, but I sincerely doubt it. We just didn't have enough in common between us to make it work in the long run." Louise and I sat in silence for a while. Then our food arrived. We ate slowly and in silence. When the bill came, I paid it despite her protests. She didn't protest much after all. She was a starving college student. Afterward, she pushed the shoebox toward me, and I pushed it back. "No, I appreciate your offer, but no. I got rid of her letters to me a long time ago. I don't need it, and I don't want it. You keep them." "Thank you. Not just for the letters, but for everything." She bit her lip. "Is it okay if we talk a little more later? I don't want to stir up bad memories, but I'd like to know more about what they were like when they were younger. But only if you don't mind." It was nice. I told the story to someone who needed to know. Not because I had to tell a therapist to curb my anger, and not because I had to tell Sue to regain my composure. When I told Louise about it, it almost felt like an exorcism. Or maybe it was just the fact that in analyzing my pain now, I find that it has diminished so much, and instead I find myself mostly remembering the friends of my youth, and remembering them with far more fondness than one might expect. But I think the most important thing is that something good came out of it in the end. What did this horrible thing come out of it? Look, my marriage to Sue, my career, my kids, and most importantly, the smart woman, biochemist, young, pretty, sitting across from me. I don't believe in platitudes like all things work together for good, but in this case, that's exactly right. We'll talk, of course. I'd be happy to. I don't think the memories of my youth will be painful to me. At first, our friendship with Louise was not very secure, insecure. I thought we had little in common except my past and our mutual love of literature, but little by little our lives intersected more and more. Louise was a bit of a fitness fanatic, and I began to join her on her morning jogs from time to time. I wasn't very good at keeping fit, but she was patient. I guided her through the realm of office politics, which always gets in the way of a graduate student's career. And as we got to know each other better, we developed additional common interests. She loved to cook, and I was a bit of a foodie. We both loved old movies from Hollywood's golden age. Our musical tastes matched, and as it turned out, there were many more little overlaps in our personalities and our interests. Gradually, she became an integral part of our home, coming over at least once a week, sometimes to cook, sometimes to help Lewis with his chemistry homework, and sometimes just to spend time with my family. Then once a week turned into twice a week, which turned into 3 times a week. By the 5th month of knowing her, I could see that something was bothering her. But on that day, the day our whole lives changed, anyone could see that she was troubled. She didn't want to talk about it, but eventually I got it out of her. He just ... When I moved out, he seemed like a normal guy. I told him I was just looking for a roommate, and he said that was fine, but now he's stalking me, saying we should be more, and she swallowed. I don't feel safe there anymore. But I don't know what to do. I have a lease, and I'd have to either find someone to take over my part of the payment or pay a penalty for breaking the lease, and I just don't have that kind of money. And then I'd have to find a new place to live, and Louise. And then I'd have to find another roommate, and
I put my hand on hers.
Louise. She looked up at me. Why don't you come stay with us? What? In the guest room. The kids love you, and I feel great with you. We're friends. The look on her face was wary but hopeful. David, I can't do this. This is your house, and you barely know me. I appreciate that, but I laughed. Are you kidding me? I've known you your whole life. She blushed, her skin darkening slightly.
I meant it. Come and stay with us.
How much do you want for rent? I patted her hand.
Cook dinner some nights, take care of the kids, pick out a movie together. We'll call it even. David, no, that's too generous. I have to.
My hand is raised in a gesture of silence.
You need to say yes. So when can you move in?
She smiled and looked at her hands. Thank you, David. Thank you so much. I went with her to get her things. There were only a few boxes, and she moved in later that night. Her roommate was angry both that she was moving out and that she showed up with another man. We had a conversation. I wasn't the testy young man I used to be, but I could lash out when I needed to, except now I used words instead of fists. Words like expulsion, harassment, and police. I paid to terminate her lease, which caused another wave of protests on her part, and we left. The kids, as expected, were beyond thrilled. First, they would no longer be fixated on Daddy's cooking. Second, I didn't realize how much the house was missing a woman. Yes, she wasn't their mother and never could be. Instead, she played the role of a much older sister or young, trendy aunt, dispensing advice to Dana on everything from her changing body to boys and bullies at school, the first I'd ever heard of it. As for Lewis, she was teaching him not only his studies, but also how to dress and talk to girls. Louise cooked and I did the dishes. Sometimes she would join me, laughing and joking. We sat around after the kids went to bed, sipping wine and talking about college politics or new movies coming out. It was comfortable, and the longer she lived with us, the more comfortable it became. It became so cozy that, like a frog in a pot of boiling water, I didn't notice anything between us change. Our occasional morning runs became a daily occurrence. She would tease me as she ran ahead, and I would try my best to keep up. And it was on these runs that I first realized a problem with her living with us that I hadn't before. She was attractive, and it had been quite some time since I'd been with a woman. There are some young women who are unaware of the effect their beauty has on the men around them. There are others who know exactly what that effect is and take advantage of it at every turn. As a professor, I've encountered both, and I've had unpleasant run-ins with underachieving female students of the latter variety before. Louise, however, was the kind of person who knew how beautiful she was and preferred not to trade on that at all. No more than the minimum requirements of social life anyway. But when she was home with us, and especially when I was running around with her, none of that mattered. She wore tight lycra shorts and a sports bra, sometimes complemented by a t-shirt. As she ran in front of me, her beautiful curves seduced me, teasing me as much as her words. Louise coaxed me to take care of my health, but her body awakened a hunger that had been largely dormant since Sue's death. When I had time after our runs, I tended to my needs like a teenager at heart. I had to, or I would think about her all day. When I didn't have time, I took cold showers instead, but it wasn't enough. I sound like a dirty old man, I know, but none of my female students ever had that effect on me. Sue and I even tried a little role-playing a couple times, where she was a student who desperately needed to change her grade and was willing to do anything to make it happen. It seemed more silly than sexy to me. In my classes, even the prettiest girls didn't set off alarm bells in my head like look but don't touch, and they hadn't for a long time, not since I became a teaching assistant in my 20s. But with Louise, I had an emotional connection. She was already in my life, and we grew closer every day. There were times when we were washing dishes, and she would check me with her hips or slide behind or in front of me, and I would need to focus on my task. When she went out with friends, I was fine. When she went out on dates, I caught myself starting to get a little jealous. Later, trying to do something about this surge in my libido, I went on my first dates after Sue died. Every time I went, I thought I saw a hint of sadness in Louise's eyes. Louise's eyes. When we first met, I saw so much of Julia in those eyes and in that smile. When I looked at her, over time it became like that optical illusion, the old lady or the young lady. I look at her for the first time and see the shadow of my first love. Then I look again and see the beautiful young woman who so often occupies my thoughts in the present. It wasn't fair to her. To us. I knew it was irrational, but my longing for her seemed almost incestuous. For the first 22 years of her life, I could almost define her by what she wasn't my daughter. That single fact changed the entire course of my life. And yet, even though she was not my daughter, she was the daughter of the woman I loved, the woman I married. And though my broken heart had long since healed, though I had long ago found and lost love again, I still felt uneasy when I sometimes looked into her eyes and saw a woman from my past. She was young. She was my ex-wife's daughter. She had a whole life ahead of her that should have been spent with someone who could grow old with her. She had never shown any overt interest in me as anything more than a friend and mentor, perhaps even a surrogate father replacing those who had been ripped out of her life. And to top it all off, although I told myself that my affection was for Louise, I always worried that I was projecting my feelings for Julia onto this woman who in so many ways was so much like her. I was concerned for her well-being. I was a responsible senior citizen. And so I put my feelings aside and abandoned my fantasies about her, disguising my romantic attachment as nothing more than a platonic affection for a younger friend. But then events conspired to remove that disguise. The kids were at school, and Louise and I ran, as we did every morning. Sometimes I ran beside her when she was lenient with me, but more often than not, I was a few steps behind her. I learned to look at her shoulders and head as I ran, not letting my eyes get any lower. I started wearing basketball shorts for our morning workout. We stopped on the sidewalk in front of my house. It was our house now, the one she shared with my family. She was truly family now, thanks to the bond she had forged with us over the months we had been together. 10 months after I'd met her, 5 after she'd moved in, and she was the indefinable but irreplaceable fourth member of our family. She was breathing hard, almost got me this time, old man. I didn't answer, huffing and puffing, trying to catch my breath. I wasn't even close to catching up to her, except when she let me. But I knew that after we started running, I felt like I was in the best shape I'd been in since I was her age. Once inside, she tossed me a bottle of water from the fridge, then took a big gulp from hers. I averted my eyes, slightly watching her bring the long, thin bottle to her lips, her skin glistening with sweat, a trickle of liquid running down her chin, a loud sigh after drinking too much and too long, all reminded me of a much more intimate act. Our ritual after Wednesday's run was already so well established that we didn't need to talk about what came next. I'd shower while she did a little cleaning in her room, then I'd leave for my 10 o'clock class. She'd head out a little later, and if we had time, we'd meet for lunch. As I walked by, I patted her shoulder gently and headed upstairs to my bedroom. It was one of those days when I didn't have time for more than a cold shower. As usual, it hardly helped at all, but I got dressed and headed out at my usual time. I'll deal with my biological urges later. I called out goodbye, but heard no reply. Louise regularly worked with headphones on, so this was no surprise. However, when I drove to campus, I was in for a surprise in the form of a call from a coworker. One of the construction crews working on the never-ending renovation of the English building had torn into a gas main. Half the campus had been evacuated, and I had no reason to come. I was only 10 minutes from home, so I turned around and thought about taking Louise out for brunch. But as I crossed the threshold, I heard her calling my name loudly, as if in distress. My laptop bag fell to the floor. As I ran up to her room, the door was ajar and I flew inside. Louise was lying on a queen-size mattress, almost completely naked, headphones drowning out any extraneous noise. The only scrap of fabric on her body was a pair of comfortable panties when she called my name again. Clutched in her left hand was a familiar piece of paper, one of the old letters she usually had in her shoebox. Her eyes were tightly closed as she gasped and called out to me, "David." "Oh God, David, oh God, oh God." Her beautiful body tensed, her dark skin glistening with fresh sweat. Her voice turned into a low grunt before she howled, "I love you." She was so beautiful that she easily surpassed the fantasies I'd been indulging in the shower or in bed late at night. I stood there, unable to move, unable to even look away. Even if I could, I don't think I would have wanted to. I knew it was wrong to see her like that. But she said my name. She said she loved me. How could I just walk away? Then Louise saw me and the spell was broken. "Louise, I." She moved quickly to cover herself, grabbing a sports bra that was lying by her head. But then she saw me and my wild urge to approach her. I thought you'd left," she said. She said. Her breathing was shallow. Whether from the lovemaking session or from the unexciting situation, it was hard to tell. I was having trouble putting together a coherent sentence. "I'm on campus. There's been a gas leak. It's closed." The embarrassment was reflected on her face. "I didn't want you to see that. I'm sorry." I could only laugh. "You're sorry?" I sighed. "I heard you calling for me. I thought you were hurt or I don't know, that you needed me." Louise slid off the bed and walked over to me with a shy, hopeful smile on her lips. "Well, actually, I did." Her face was so close I could have leaned in and kissed her. "I just didn't know how to tell you. Maybe it's better this way." She bridged the gap by standing up on tiptoe and gently touching her lips to mine. "I really need you, David. I love you." "Louise, Shage, David. Just let me explain." I nodded, and she sat me down on the edge of her bed, not close enough to touch. "Everything I've told you, it's all true. My parents' deaths, how I found the box of letters, all of it. But what I didn't tell you." She looked down and smiled. "When I started reading them, I thought they were beautiful. So lovely. The things you wrote when you were younger were well, the letters were quite crude, but so passionate. And as you wrote more, as you grew older, and your love for my mother deepened," she grinned. I was crazy about it. Jealous, even. I'd never had someone treat me like that. Or maybe there was something, but I'd never felt that way about anyone. When I got to the end and the letters suddenly cut off, I admit I became a little obsessed. Why did they stop? How could something so strong stagger? Had my mom done something to drive it away? Or were they just pretty words from the slacker who'd abandoned her? And then, as I thought more about it, about the possibilities, especially that you could have been my father, a sad chuckle and an oblique look. Well, I'll admit it cooled my infatuation a bit, but not the obsession with wanting to know what happened. However, like I said, I eventually gave up and decided to live with the idea that I would never find out. She put her hand on mine. And that's when fate intervened. Or luck, whatever. I came across your picture. I learned the truth from you. And it broke my heart that my mother rewarded such love with such disrespect. That my father was so dishonorable, I think. I think I finally realized what caused the rift with my grandfather. He was such a loyal man that his son, who acted in such a... Louise shook her head. But when I met you and heard that story, it made me feel. I realized that my infatuation had never completely faded. The attachment to this boy, then to this young man, to the way he poured out his love in those beautifully written letters. And then I knew you, really knew you. I recognized the man you've become since you first wrote those lines. Kind and sweet, spending your soul generously on someone you didn't really know. A great father, a devoted husband. So smart, so funny. She squeezed my hand and looked right at me. I'm in love with you, not just infatuated, in love. But I knew that your behavior was impeccable, not just with me, but with the students, other girls on campus. I've asked around a little bit about you, and I know that you're one of those people who absolutely, positively will not tolerate even the hint of this kind of scandal. Not just because of your career, but because you're just a great guy. A good man. Louise moved a little closer to me, and I turned slightly toward her. But God, David. God, I want so badly for you to just put this aside for me. I know I'm younger than you, and you don't want to take advantage of that. I like that. But it's not taking advantage. I know the way you look at me, how it makes you embarrassed. But what you don't know is that I like it. Today, after our run, after all our runs, I wanted you to just grab me and kiss me. Every Wednesday, I come into the bedroom after you leave, and I read these letters and pretend they are addressed to me because I want it so badly. I wish the person who wrote them loved me as much as I love him. She put her hand on my face, and I smelled, quite faintly, her scent. You told me that everyone should have a love like a forest fire at least once in their life. You are it, David. You're my wildfire. Louise's eyes were so beautiful then, glistening with unshed tears, afraid I would reject her. A part of me said I should do it, that she represented me as something I wasn't. But I wanted her so badly, loved her, longed to burn in that wildfire with her. All my doubts came to my mind as I struggled to be a grown, mature man, and they were all cast aside by what she revealed until only Louise's eyes remained in front of me. Louise's eyes. Not Julia's. I hadn't realized until that moment that I hadn't seen Julia there for a long time, months, perhaps. She wasn't Julia's daughter. She was Louise, a beautiful, wonderful person in her own right. It wasn't some kind of nostalgia. I loved Louise, and I loved her in a way I thought I could never love again. My hand wiped a tear from her cheek as I leaned toward her. Her mouth opened slightly, partly from surprise, partly from desire, but then her body twitched to shorten the distance between us. The first kiss she'd ever bestowed on me had been sweet and tentative. This kiss was neither. It was a spark that ignited our world. As we kissed, Louise tugged at my shirt. Her finger brushed against my chin, catching my eye as she pleaded, later. Please, I need you somewhere else right now. I want to see you completely. I felt like a teenager again, my body filled with energy as the stunning dark-skinned young woman looked at me with a raspy grin. If I had known, we would have ended up here much sooner. I grinned and sat down on the bed. Louise slowly moved me closer, inviting me to start. It would have been rude to refuse. I kissed my young mistress without stopping her actions. Louise let out a happy sigh, which turned into a pained whimper when I pulled away, then changed back to a joyful babble when we found common ground. It feels so good, David. Please, please, I love it. Please, I love you. I'm yours. Show me, baby. Show me I'm yours. It was after a long break for me, but I was determined to hold out as long as I could. She was enthusiastic and vocal, passionate and athletic. She spurred me on, praised me, begged me, wanted me. I wanted to be the best lover, the best man she could dream of. I love you, Louise. Her eyes filled with tears, and she held on tightly as I drew closer to my completion. Please, David. Show me how much you love me. Show me that I'm yours. She screamed again, and I did it with her. She kissed my neck, nuzzling her nose into it as our pulse slowed. Then, as we lay together, she snuggled up against me and nestled into the fold of my arm. It was wonderful, David. I want more of that. I laughed. Maybe in a little while, sweetheart. The downside of falling in love with an old man. Her hand ran up and down my chest. Stop it. You're not old. You're experienced. I snorted, ancient. Kiss skilled, aged, stamina. I couldn't resist. Aged, huh? Would you like a taste? The morning and early afternoon continued in much the same vein, with short breaks for a light lunch and then a shower. Truth be told, neither of these turned out to be such a great break. We had to clean the kitchen much more thoroughly afterward than if we'd just eaten, and we probably came out of the shower dirtier than when we went in. But then, afterward, we sat on the couch and talked. She put her head in my lap when we finally reached my limits. At least for the moment. I love you, Louise. Are you sure? I sighed, stroking her hair. Are you sure this is what you want? I want you to have a good future, a happy life. And I'm much older then. She put her finger to my lips. You're not much older. This isn't the 19th century, David. You're going to live to a ripe old age, and I'm going to drag your ass out for a run every day to make sure of it. And I've already started cooking the healthiest meals possible. Tricky woman. Louise laughed. Whatever it takes, baby. I have to make sure you live long. I'm yours now. No backing out. What about the kids? Dana and Louis? She bit her lip. I hope they don't mind. God, I don't even. Shit. I laughed. No, it's not about them. They love you. They love Louise, the cool older sister. I'm not sure how they'd feel about Louise, She fell silent, not knowing how to finish that sentence. Cool stepmother, is that something I can hope for? She blushed, even as a wide smile spread across her face. Really? I don't expect. I know this is new, and I don't want. Now it was my turn to silence her. It is, if that's what you want. It doesn't have to be official, but I'm not looking for anything casual. I want to. I'm in love with you. And I want it to be serious, with serious intentions. Not right now, not necessarily even next year. But I don't want to be just your adolescent. Passionate crush, okay? Louise choked, unable to speak, then hugged me tightly. I felt her nodding her head fervently, pressing herself against my stomach, then lightly yes. God, yes. We just sat like that for a while. Then I sighed. But about the kids, do you want them? If you got pregnant today, I'd... Oh, damn it. Wait, are you on the pill? She laughed long and loud. Yes, of course I am. I'm horny and in love, not stupid. She loosened her grip on me, rolling her head back onto my lap and looking up at me intently from below. I hope they have your eyes. Yes, I want to have children with you. If you're worried about not leaving them, don't worry. I'm going to keep you in shape, remember? A devilish smile flashed across her face. After all, you have to maintain stamina. Louis and Dana took it better than I expected. Dana just shrugged and said it's about time and then went off to play Roblox. Louis was a little glum. I don't think he ever completely dismissed the idea that he might end up courting Louise in some way. But then later, when the two of us were watching TV together, he said so. Louise, huh? I nodded. That's nice. And he nodded back, a tiny show of respect. From a teenage boy. This was probably the biggest surprise of the day. There was a little commotion on campus, but not too much. No ethical boundaries had been violated, and I had a good reputation from the start. Louise's family proved to be the biggest stumbling block. Some of them knew about my past with her mother and treated me like some creepy old pervert, but she ended up reading them the riot act in very fast and loud Spanish that I could barely follow. After that, no one really dared to talk about the boo thing. A couple years later, we got married. She looked radiant in her wedding dress, 5 months pregnant with our first child. Louis was my best man, a duty he took very, very seriously. Our marriage was happy and full of love. By the time we were old, Louisa had a trunk full of letters from me telling her of my love for her, sometimes with tender and chaste words, sometimes not. No way in hell would we let our children read them.
Thank you for listening. Please share your opinion about this story in comment section. Also make sure to like and subscribe to the channel.